Hello, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. Every time that I teach this class, I do a little recap that lasts about half an hour. Just for those who are new, because I see many new faces, this is in fact week 13 of this series, which should not really worry you that much because all that we've really talked about at this point is JavaScript. We've talked about some jQuery, we've talked about Angular, and throughout this half-hour intro, I'm going to be just recapping kind of what we've been talking about with different libraries. And then once we get started, we're essentially going to be doing the same thing over again using React. But since we've got a lot of new faces, I thought I'd also show you guys this slide, which I usually show on week 1, which is just a little bit about the class that you're going to be learning, watching, doing things with. One thing that I should mention is that it's not on this slide, that you are at Noisebridge. Welcome to Noisebridge. Noisebridge is a hackerspace. It is a nonprofit, free to the public, open as much as possible place for people to come and hack. Hacking means working on your project, learning new things, doing unconventional stuff with conventional tools or unconventional tools. You know, applying your skills in one way or another. And Noisebridge is the place to do that. I've been a volunteer at Noisebridge for about 5 years now, just teaching this class. I am not actually even an official member of Noisebridge. I just come here and teach because it's fun to do, and that is the freedom that Noisebridge allows you. If you're interested in learning more about the people behind Noisebridge and possibly like how the vegan sausage is made, then Tuesday evenings there's like kind of a little meet and greet weekly Noisebridge meeting where you can meet new people, talk about projects that are happening, talk about consensus items, finances, that sort of stuff. Otherwise, welcome. You're pretty much able to come in here whenever you have someone to answer the door and just vouch for you. Just say what you're doing, like come to a class, and you'll be allowed in. So that's about it. So like this thing says, possibly you've read this. I am streaming this onto YouTube, so you'll be able to access this and all prior classes and possibly all future classes on YouTube after they air. Like I said, we are kind of in the middle of the course syllabus. These are kind of the last few classes on JavaScript before I switch into talking about CSS a little bit after that. And I will have a lab also on Thursday. I'm basically just going to be sitting and smiling, and you'll be able to come up to me with problems that you have, questions that you have, and I'll be able to do more one-on-one answer type stuff. I also give out an assignment. Oh gosh, I have to write an assignment about React because I can usually reuse stuff from previous series, but I haven't done one for React. So I will be putting out an assignment probably about some basic React stuff that you can. It's going to be open book, open answers, but you'll be able to go through it. It's a very important thing just for learning to be able to do this stuff yourself without me telling you exactly in front of you what to do. All that said, the way that I usually teach these lectures is that I expect people, or I encourage people, that is, to follow along on their computers with writing some code, because that's definitely the best way. Well, it's the best way to learn something from a lecture. The best way to learn is by going ahead and doing something yourself, which I very highly encourage. You could read all the programming books in the world, end up not being able to write a single line of code. So do stuff. That's my recommendation. Otherwise, thanks for coming. We're going to get started talking about just stuff we talked about in previous classes, but I should switch a little bit over to this slide once again. There's a little bit of setup to be done for this class. It's sort of assumed by this time in the class that people know how to do basic command line stuff. If you don't know how to do command line stuff, that's fine. But you really should just be able to know how to open up your terminal application and then just type in commands and press enter, and I'll pretty much guide you along with that. The knowledge of the CD command would help, which is changing directories. Beyond that, not much else is necessary. And also, in addition to these steps, which also include installing Git, even though we're not really going to be doing that much Git in this class, probably not at all. I also recommend that you install Node.js. If you already have Node.js installed, I recommend that you find out what version it is. If you don't know how to do that, then you can open up your terminal and you can type node-v, and it will tell you what your version is. -v stands for version. So I've got almost the latest version of Node, which is good enough. If it starts with a 6, then you're good. If it doesn't, then just go to nodejs.org and download the latest features version. Sorry, I should have left that open, but it was node space -v. Cool. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any things people need to know? Confusion? Why are you here? Any of that? Okay. I'll say this again at 8, but this specific class is kind of a two-parter. This week, we're going to be talking about just React. We're going to try to shy away from things like Redux and all the different sorts of little libraries that come along with Redux. But we will have a class on Redux, which is the de facto kind of state machine of that a lot of people like using, next week. So next Monday is going to be kind of expanding on what we've done today. But yeah, hopefully I can walk you guys through setting up a simple React application this time around. Yeah. Okay. So assuming that you've started to follow or finished following these easy steps, then you possibly have had access to the front-end web development repository. So if you haven't run this command to download fwd.git, go ahead and do that. If you have Git, if you know how to do it, and you should be able to open up that folder and find your way into Series 10. This is Series 10, Class 12. And we can take a look at what we did last week. So, as a bonus for those who are coming here to learn React, you'll also learn a little bit about Angular 1, which we talked about last week. So, not Angular 2, unfortunately. I don't really know much about it. It was just released, so it'll probably be a little while, if at all, that I actually end up learning anything about it. But right now, maybe it's a little nice intro to that sort of thing.
Can you go back for the GitHub URL?
Sure. It's actually right here on the screen. It's github.com/ww/fwd. And if you want to find a link to that on this page, it's really just this link right here. It doesn't stand out very much, but it's right here. So but you can also just run this command to download it. Anyway, it's fwd Series 10, Class 12. So, if you have downloaded the whole repository or cloned it, or if you also don't really want to if you don't know anything about Git or what that's all about, then you can just go ahead and press this green download button and download a zip file, and that'll just be the entire repository in a big zip format that you can unzip. Either way, it's all the same stuff. So I'm going to go to FWD Series 10, Class 12, and just take a look at what we've done last week, and probably what we're going to be dealing with this week as well.
Series 10 refer to?
Series 10 refers to this
cycle.
Yes, this cycle. It is. I have been teaching this series of classes for 10 times. So this is definitely the 10th time I'm doing all this. Well, not React. I haven't been teaching React for 5 years because that's impossible. But yeah, okay. So this is what we dealt with last week. What we've got is a basic Twitter client. You have the ability to type stuff in here. The numbers count down as you start typing stuff in, and there's a bug because you should be able to tweet, but you can't. That's too bad. I must have entered in my logic wrong, and I must have left the class in a bad state. That's too bad. Well, I can probably do a little debugging and find out why that's a problem and how I can fix it. Hey, that's a good recap sort of thing. But anyway, there's also the ability to like and retweet individual tweets here, and the colors change when you do it. But given that this is a front-end web development class, I didn't actually go into things like server architecture, storing stuff in a database. I did have a class on Ajax, which is your web browser using JavaScript to communicate with web servers, but I didn't talk about what actually happens on that web server because, again, outside of the realm of everything that's going on here. So what we have here is something that doesn't even talk with the internet. It's just a straight-up FACO front-end application, and it's written in Angular 1. So let's take a look at how that's all set up. First of all, we might as well go ahead and look at index.html. So if you've got your text editor of choice, wow, it's taking a long time to fetch my favorite text editors, huh? Isn't it? try that again. There we go. Then you can go ahead and open up this HTML file, and we can take a look at what's going on in here. A lot of this stuff is just, you've got a lot of divs with classes. That's just a lot of,
This is class 1? Oh, so directly.
No, I said earlier it's class 12.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
That's cool. So series 10, class 12. Yeah, so this mostly looks like HTML to you. It is an HTML file, and it will be downloaded as an HTML file in your browser. But there's some interesting stuff going on in here. You might notice as you look through the code that there are these ng- attributes throughout the code here. ng app, ng controller, ng class, ng source, a whole bunch of stuff starting with ng. And you'll also notice that I've got some script tags loading up in the head. I usually load stuff at the bottom of the body. For this one specifically, I'm loading JavaScript up in the head because I want to download, because I'm leaving it up to these JavaScript files to determine how the entire page is rendered out. Also, interestingly enough, this body, if you take a look at it real closely, doesn't actually have anything other than script tags, script, and then a single div in there that's blank. So that's also kind of interesting. What's going on here is that I'm using a special kind of script called a text/ng template to tell Angular that there's a certain number of HTML templates that I want it to use, and I want it to spit out in a certain way. But we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what's going on there. So yeah, there's that. So let's see, what does this all mean? I think that probably the best way of walking through this is also to have our app.js sitting probably, let's do a little split view sort of thing. Oops, that's not what I wanted. No. Oh man, what's the keyboard shortcut? Layout, columns 2. I haven't done it in a while. Okay, so here on the right we've got our JavaScript, and here on the left we've got our index.html. Index.html is loading up jQuery, which at this point is actually unnecessary. We don't really need this. Angular is the Angular stuff, and then finally app.js is the file we see on the right here. So on the right, we are telling Angular to create a new module called Noise Twitter. And on the left here, we are telling the body to treat everything inside the body as part of the Noise Twitter app. So ng app and creating Angular.module Noise Twitter, those two things are connected, as you can see, because they both say Noise Twitter, right? Also, we've got this ng controller equals main control. And as you can see on line 3, we're telling Angular to create a new controller called main control. So these two things are connected. So what's a module? What's a controller? Well, modules, those are actually worth knowing, and they're actually quite relevant to the actual class we're going to be talking about at 8, which is that it is essentially a bundle of code that is named that you're able to import or inject or include in different ways into some sort of module loader. Let's talk a little bit about line 1 up here. var app equals angular.module noise Twitter. And then we've got this empty array here. The way that Angular does dependency injection, that is to say, saying specifically which modules this module needs to run, is providing this little array up here when we create a new module. Again, a module is just a whole bunch of code that's got a name associated with it, noise Twitter. But this array, which is blank, could be filled with the names of a bunch of other modules that we've already loaded up that this might need to run. So so yeah, basically what I'm just getting at is that ng app, that's just saying that this is the whole thing, and ng controller is just pointing to this. And we'll also notice, in addition to when we're saying Angular.module noise Twitter with a little array here, we're saying app.controller main control. We've also got an array following that. What Angular does, not only when you create a new module, a new big bundle of code, but what also little pieces of this bundle of code, such as a controller, is say specifically what's necessary for that controller to run. I've gotten a little ahead of myself. What's a controller? A controller defines a new scope for you to start adding information into. For those who are approaching, of course, we're talking about React eventually today, but for those who are approaching React with no prior knowledge of the whole model view split, or you're coming from more of a jQuery background where you use jQuery to change around the DOM, change around the document, you should know specifically about the idea where you are storing your information, you're storing your data, your stuff like, for example, tweets. This is an array here that's got a whole bunch of data inside it. No HTML elements, no P's or divs or A's or anything like that, just a whole bunch of text. And this, what we've got on the right here, is defining our model, our data model, just the sort of information that we need in order to properly tell our page to render. But the actual rendering stuff is happening on the left here. What we've got in index.html is our view. That is to say, the actual HTML elements that are going to show up. Everything that is, visible, interactable, structured content for the user to experience. But this on the right is not so much structured content as it is just data. So we sort of define this separation, which makes it really interesting because we don't really have to worry. Once we've got all our data in order, and we've got our instructions, kind of our blueprint set up of how our view should render, we don't ever have to worry again about whether the view is rendering properly or having to specifically go into the view and change stuff around, because we've already got everything listed out about how the view should change based on what the data is. So that sort of separation is important. React specifically doesn't use a model view separation of sorts. In fact, even defines the quote-unquote view information in our JavaScript file as well. But we'll get to that when we start talking about React a little bit and how that sort of stuff differs. But anyway, I was talking about a controller and how it provides us with something called a scope. And this scope, if you're familiar with JavaScript function scope, where you're able to just define variables within kind of an encapsulated area, an isolated area where stuff outside can't access this scope, like a new little container for your new data. That's what's going on here. This controller, main controller, has a scope, and we can refer to things like current page, character limit, tweets, anything that's being added onto the scope object in here. So you might note that we've got this ng controller thing here, and inside we have the ability to access stuff like, well, actually, let me skip past script type so-and-so and script type so-and-so. And, oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. Let's start here. Where are we? Ah, yes, ng model, new tweet text. So here's an example. We've got a text area. Of course, a text area in HTML is a big thing you can type into. And we use the ng model attribute to refer to something called new tweet text. New tweet text happens to be an empty string right here. What's going on with this ng model inside this text area is that anything that you type into this text area is going to be immediately saved into new tweet text. And conversely, if we do any logic on this model side here on app.js to somehow change scope.newTweetText, like on line 44, for example, that will update the text area. So what we've got is this two-way binding between the view and the model, where the view can change the model and the model can change the view. That's pretty cool. And otherwise, there's no real way, given that this is all inside the main controller, that is the way that we know what we're referring to when we say new tweet text. If we didn't add new tweet text onto the scope object, we wouldn't be able to do something as simple as ng model is new tweet text. There's other stuff around here where we access certain scope variables. And you'll also notice probably throughout this HTML that we've got a lot of interesting handlebars type stuff going on here. Two curly brackets. Inside those curly brackets, we're evaluating JavaScript. That is to say, inside our view, inside our HTML view, we have little parts where we are just interpolating some JavaScript statements. So what I mean by that is that even though I try to keep all of my logic to the model best I can, there is actually the ability to just use JavaScript to pretty much print out information, to evaluate small statements that allow you to run functions or just access variables or do little things that just allow you to print stuff out. So what's going on with this little double bracket thing here is that we're referring to character limit, which is defined right here, scope.characterLimit, and we're subtracting new tweet text.length from it. And of course, new tweet text is defined right here. So what's happening is that every time this model updates with the new tweet text, new string or whatever, then Angular will automatically run this little bit of logic here that subtracts that new length from the character limit and gives us, oops, not that, gives us this number right here. So that's a little example of, this whole sort of magic thing at work. We don't have to run a function ourselves necessarily that goes and says, find the counter and change its text to be this new thing, because we've already pretty much set up that instruction right here. This is, I'm kind of comparing it to what we had to do in JavaScript, or sorry, not in JavaScript, but in jQuery. We're doing everything we're doing here is JavaScript. But in jQuery, where we had to reach out to this specific element called tweetbox counter and tell it to update. The cool thing about classes, specifically in an Angular and React world, is that they have little to no bearing on how the app actually runs, only how it renders. Almost entirely, you use classes in this sort of new environment to just style things using CSS. That said, Angular 1 does allow you to select things with specific element names or attributes or class names to make them, sort of change how they work. But it's not required to do it that way. Anyway, what's some other stuff we can talk about? Well, we've got, like I said, we've got 2 script tags with a lot of HTML inside them, and then we've got one div. And this div has an ng-include attribute. I keep calling these things attributes, which they are. They are attributes on elements, but they're also referred to as directives. In Angular, you can reach out to specific attributes that might have some behavior associated with them. And anything that starts with ng-so-and-so is a directive that's been provided to us by Angular. This is in contrast to directives you can create yourself, which you can pretty much call anything you want. You can create new element names, you can create new attribute names, you can really just do anything to find your own behavior. And I did get into that in previous series, but I spend less time talking about Angular nowadays that I don't really get into it that much. But anyway, this ng-include directive, when provided with a source attribute, allows us to load up a specific template based on what the current page is. And it turns out that the current page is /main.html, and that just happens to be the name of this script tag. See, ID is main.html. So because the current page is main.html, this is going to be the HTML that's actually loaded into the page. We've got our form, and then we've got our section. And as we can see here, we have a form, and we have a section, right? So that's what's being loaded up. And what else can I talk about? I've gone very fast because, of course, this is a recap, and I'm talking about a lot of information that, in most cases, doesn't actually really correspond to what we're going to be talking about with Angular. Oh, sorry, with React, since I know we've got a lot of new people. But I thought this might be a little illuminating, and at least catching up people who are continuing to take the class but might have missed a single week, just to sort of catch up a little bit. But I will slow down a little bit and ask if anyone has any questions at this point. Any thoughts? Any things they'd like to know about Angular specifically?
So know about it, and is that of course HTML allows for those tags, but so Angular will scan through all attributes on all the tags to see if it has some code corresponding. That's
right. Yeah. What Angular does is it just parses through the entire DOM tree, looks for interesting stuff like these handlebars here, or any sort of attributes that it might be aware of, like ng-something, and it just runs the corresponding JavaScript that goes along with it. So, just a whole bunch of different functions that are defined, come along with Angular, or in some cases you can define yourself. Yeah.
The two-way data binding you mentioned?
Yes.
So the first way that it gets affected is just live. So if you type anything in, it gets updated, right? But within the module,
yes.
What is the trigger for it to re-update?
Well, the trigger specifically, in Angular 1, this is actually, I think this is something that doesn't apply to Angular 2, so only Angular 1. In Angular 1, there's the idea of a digest loop, where any sort of event that occurs on the page, such as submitting a form, and we've got a little thing for ng-submit here, or just updating this field with any new information. Any of those little events, any of those user-driven events that occur, cause something called the digest loop to occur. And when you're in the middle of a digest, anything like unshifting a new tweet onto this list of tweets, or setting the new tweet text to something, once all that processing is done, once that digest loop is over, then that's when the DOM updates itself if it needs to. So we're not explicitly telling Angular to re-render the DOM. We're not saying, hey, Angular, okay, we're done. Go ahead and update this div, update that, update this. Angular is smart enough to know that after some sort of event occurred on the page, and we've changed any of these objects or we've changed any of these values to new things, it knows to update the affected elements, anything that's using that. So
the change in line 44,
yes.
it happens because the add tweet function is run when someone presses the button. Okay.
That's exactly it. Yeah. Specifically due to the fact that submitting this form causes add tweet to run. That starts a digest loop because it started with from a user originated event. That anything like that just kicks Angular into gear, saying, okay, I'm going to run all the code that needs to be run, and once this function's over, then I'm going to go ahead and make sure the page updates.
So ways to call that explicitly, for example, if you have a clock or a counter or something.
Yes.
It's not user initiated.
There is a way to do that. In case you have an interval or you're doing an AJAX call or you're doing some other, actually Angular is smart enough to listen for asynchronous stuff as well. But in case you need to do something like update the scope outside of the realm of some sort of user originated event, there is a $apply method on every one of these scope objects that allows you to specifically start a digest, change any stuff that needs to happen, and Angular will then update itself if necessary. I mean, update the DOM if necessary. Good question.
So this app.js is loaded on the client, right? So
yeah.
There's no code. What problems does Angular solve really well?
What problems does it solve very well? Well, it allows separation of model and view, for one thing. So it makes it so you barely, I'm not going to say never, but I'm going to say barely have to worry about the state of the DOM, because Angular is in charge of making sure that the DOM has updated itself. So you never have to, you shouldn't have to be concerned about whether your DOM, whether all your elements are in the right place or not, because you've already written all the code here that does that sets them all up in the right place. So that's one thing that makes sure you don't have to, it solves the problem of having to go through a repeat. Like, for example, here on this main page, we've got this ng repeat call that repeats a whole bunch of tweets within this tweets thing. You don't have to worry about counting the number of tweets that are on the page that have been loaded into your DOM, because all that data is right there. So it reduces the worry factor of you having to know how your DOM is all currently laid out, because you can just trust that if your data is correct, then your DOM will be correct. I don't know. What are some other problems it solves? I mean, hard to tell, hard to say specifically what are specifically problems, but yeah.
Why did they create Angular? Why did Google create?
Why did Google create Angular? Well, because they wanted an efficient system for sort of reducing the amount of spaghetti code that's necessary for keeping this stuff alive. Something that Angular solves that I would say, for example, jQuery, a jQuery written site has a hard time dealing with, is this the idea? Well, let's say that you got this list of tweets here, right? Let's say that you wanted to edit one of these tweets and change its information. Well, what you'd have to do is you'd have to take my current name, my current avatar, whether it's retweeted, whether it's liked, the content, the time. You'd have to take all those individual attributes, and then you'd have to generate a form and use jQuery to go ahead and write out all these elements and set the values of each individual form element properly, and then hide the form, show the form, hide all the data, and then be able to edit stuff. When you press save, you have to capture that, get rid of the form, make sure that you update all these sorts of things. But then, oh no, what if you've got a list of tweets here, but you've got, like TweetDeck, a second list of tweets here that's maybe filtered differently. Like you've got some of the same ones, some of the different ones. Well, then you have to update them in 2 different places. And that would be twice the work, because you'd have to make sure that this list gets updated, that list gets updated, that list. With Angular, since all these things are bound to a specific bit of data there, you can be 100% sure that any changes made in that little form that appears, and by the way, the form can be pre-populated with those same bits of data, will propagate throughout the entire page. So you can be sure that you'll never have any stale data on the page, which has been a significant problem when I was dealing with old JavaScript, with old jQuery-specific user interfaces. So that's one thing that it solves. And it solves it pretty efficiently. And Angular 2 improves upon that, and I think React also improves upon that in a different way as well. And what do you know? It's 8. Yeah.
Very good question.
Yeah.
How does Node fit into this? Because you're not hosting like the app.js is just when the browser is just extra.
You're wondering how it's being loaded, or?
Yeah, because I mean, like, it's probably a really naive question.
No, don't worry about it.
You've got app.js there,
Mhm.
but where we're using Node in this.
We're not using Node right now.
We're not using it.
Yeah. This is a flat file living on my computer. It's being loaded via the file protocol right here. So no network whatsoever going on here. Yeah. But once we start working with React, that will change a little bit. So yeah. All that said, any other questions about this before we get on to the actual stuff you're here for? Okay. Well, the little robotic voice is going to talk about React, and so will I. So let's get started. Okay. Hi again. This is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey, and we're going to start talking about React. So React. I've talked about React in previous series, but this is the first time in this class that I'm really going to try to get into actually writing some code using the React library. But let's talk about what React specifically is. React. That's a perfect description of what it is. It's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Specifically, what it does is it lets you define a series of different components on your page. And those components render out HTML. That's actually a little simplistic because you can also use React for stuff outside of the web. There's this idea of React Native where you can make mobile apps with it, or other sorts of targets that don't necessarily render out HTML. But when it all comes down to it, React is responsible for printing out stuff that the user is going to see based on the data that you have. So, in many ways, it is still kind of like you have your model, now it's time to print out your view sort of thing. But I think the idea, and this is very important, is that it's component-based. So you're able to split up your application into small components, into little bits that do different things. I guess when we were talking about Angular just now and also last week, we were talking about how there are different templates. Like there's this tweet template, and there's also this main template. And the main template loads up the tweet template. And so that idea of one template loading up another is the same sort of idea where we have one component which renders out a child component, which then renders itself out. So I should also say that React does not solve all of your problems. It's not necessarily there to help you make a gigantic, it's not there to be the be-all, end-all of making a gigantic, extremely complicated user interface structure. Because sure, React's really good at rendering stuff out, but it doesn't really have any concept of an event system like Angular does. It doesn't have any concept of like knowing specifically when to re-render or how to update your data. All of that stuff is up to you to set. It's up to you to specifically declare when you want information to update and how you want that update to be handled. So I don't really want to get too far into it because I think that we have an easy tool that allows us to sort of jump right into it and see specifically how a very, very, very simple Angular app works. And then we can start building on top of that. The tool that I like using, you could go ahead and just download React right now. You could go ahead and start using it. The problem about React is that it assumes that you're working with a slightly more modern tool set than what you might have traditionally used with some sort of jQuery app or some sort of Angular or Knockout or Backbone or other sorts of older JavaScript libraries. It assumes that you're writing more modern JavaScript code than some browsers can handle. Specifically, the term ECMAScript. ECMAScript 2015, 2016, ECMAScript 6. There's a lot of different varietals and varieties and whatever. But the idea is that we've got some language features in JavaScript itself that that not all browsers yet handle. And React is written with the idea that you're using those newer sorts of paradigms to sort of speed up your development and make things a little nicer. Because JavaScript has had its problems in the past. It's not a perfect language. It was cobbled together very hastily, and people have been trying to fix those sorts of problems for a long time. And ECMAScript 6 is kind of like a little, step forward in that way. Also, there's the idea of being able to take all your JavaScript and bundle it into a single package. Minify your stuff, remove the little parts of JavaScript of your JavaScript bundle that you're not using. There's the idea of making sure that your CSS is also modern. Auto-prefixing your stuff. So any vendor prefixes, the CSS rules that you write, CSS properties that you write will be supported as much as possible. There's all these different sorts of little components that help make a React app the way it works. And I think that being able to teach you, that having to teach you every little bit of one of those things and cobble together a React app is going to be so difficult. There's going to be so much boilerplate before we can actually get started. So fortunately, we've got Create React App. Create React App, create React's app with no build configuration. All you really have to do is install Create React App, call the Create React App command, run start, and all of a sudden, you've got a little React application set up nicely. It lets you go from there. It's kind of a little hello world that you can just start to edit. It is my opinion, and it is many other people's opinions, that you should never have to start from scratch when it comes to programming. If someone else has already solved your problem and they've done it in an open source MIT, Apache, or sometimes GNU licensed way, then go ahead and use that stuff instead of having to reinvent the wheel. No need to do that. And Create React App certainly does that. So I asked you all earlier to make sure that you install Node.js before coming here. And so if you have Node.js version 6, then you should all be good. What I'd like you to do is go ahead and you can do that. You can run this from any folder because it's going to install this globally throughout your entire file system. To npm install -g create React app. Sorry, one second. Cool. So you'll probably get a larger list of stuff in yellow than I have. It's listing out a whole bunch of different dependencies that need to be installed. For me, I already have it all installed, so it's just listing out this is what you got. But npm is called the Node Package Manager. It's not so much a backronym as people just really refer to it as npm, but it allows you to install specific modules by name. It's just downloading them off the internet based on the name of the thing, and it's going ahead and installing it. This is a very easy way to just say, I want to install some Node stuff. What's Node, by the way, for those who don't know? Node is a JavaScript runtime outside of your browser. That is to say, it has the ability, it gives you the ability to run JavaScript files outside of your browser, and we've used it. We've used it before in this class. A lot of the code that we're dealing with on and off the web now is JavaScript. So now that we've got this, we have the ability to run the command create React app. So I'm going to go into a specific folder of mine. I'm going to go into Series 10 class 13 because I think that's what this is. You don't have to do the same thing. In fact, if you've downloaded my class materials, I recommend you don't create a folder inside the thing that you've downloaded. I recommend that you create your own folder to work on your own projects. If you already have it, then please go ahead and do it. And just go ahead and create a new folder for this class, not inside my own Git thing that you might have cloned. Why? Because later on you might want to update my repository with the latest stuff. And if you've got your stuff working there, then there's going to be conflicts. So make sure you keep this pristine. I'm the only one who should be dealing with it, so that's how it works. But now that I'm inside a folder that I want to start working on, I'm going to go ahead and create React app. And I'm going to call this Noise Twitter. You can call it whatever you want. You don't have to entirely follow along with what I've got here. But I'm going to go ahead and create React app Noise Twitter. So that'll take a little while since after installing Create React App, it has to download even more stuff. So just give that a minute or two. It's actually taking a while. Uh-oh.
You know, how much bandwidth everybody's sitting at home.
Well, that could be it. I also want to make sure that I'm actually still online here. Oh, good, I am. Okay. So if anyone's having any problems with installation, please let me know. You should have a little happy hacking message at the end when you're all done. But it says, success, create a noise Twitter at so-and-so. Inside that directory, you can run several commands. We're just going to be running these 2 commands. So, you know. Yes, so first you have to make sure that you install create React app using this command. If that's all done, then you just run create React app, and I named my project noise Twitter. Cool. And then it's going to do this whole thing, which will take a minute or 2. By the way, to run previous commands in your terminal, you just press the up button to go through your history. I'm sorry? Yeah, there's one point at which it kind of freezes a little bit. So I'm going to let people, you know, just download stuff. Everybody's on the same access point right there, so it might be a little overloaded, which might slow things down a little bit.
Should we go ahead and do an NPM start? Or?
Nope,
No?
not yet. Just waiting for everyone to catch up. Well, by the way, if you are familiar with your terminal and you're familiar with the name of your computer, you might see that you've got a different name. Like I've got Udera ViewZcom. I don't know what that is, but what happens when you're on the NoiseBridge network specifically is that the router in the other room assigns your computer a new host name. So even though my computer's name is actually Jeffrey HW Lap, it's referring to itself as something different. So if you see that, it's nothing wrong. No one's got access to your computer. It's just the NoiseBridge router is telling your computer to do weird things.
Oh,
Not harmful.
Vincess error, yes.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, okay, yeah, all right, yeah. It's weird because I didn't even have it as part of my prompt. So.
Okay. So anyone else, everyone else good? Everyone installed? Anyone need more room? Need more time? How's it going? Still?
It says clean up, remove extracted module, still, oh, it's just doing stuff.
Okay, that's fine.
What kind of prompt are you using?
Oh, I designed this prompt myself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is Bash, but I just created my little prompt to have some nice coloration there and a little pizza emoji. You know.
Does it show you like what GitHub repo you're in?
Actually, yeah, it does. When I'm inside a GitHub repo, when I have the actual space, let me try that again. When I have the space, there we go. See how it says that I'm on my branch master? Yeah. So yeah. Anyway. Cool. But anyway, once we've all done that, I think that we're all ready at this point. Okay. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and go into the Noise Twitter application, Noise Twitter folder, cd Noise Twitter, and then go ahead and do npm start. And when you do npm start, you'll be brought to your browser, and it will open up this. Welcome to React. Cool. So what we've got here is a React app. Ta-da. The cool thing about this React app is that as we start to make changes to it, you're not going to have to restart your server. You're not even going to have to reload this web page. Changes that you make to your code, once you save them, will immediately show up on this page. It's pretty cool. If you make any mistakes, those errors will show up on this page. So it's very, very helpful, speeds you along, you know, gets you started pretty quickly. So now that we've got this, we can go ahead and open up our text editor. And I'm just going to go ahead and find my thing I was just starting. And I'm going to open up, well, I want to actually open up this entire folder in my text editor. So if you're using something like Sublime, Atom, Brackets, VS Code, you can just open up an entire folder. I'm going to go select my folder that I just created, Noise Twitter here, and just press open. And it's going to show all of my stuff there. So again, you just navigate through your open dialog to find the specific folder that was generated, called Noise Twitter probably, and it will show all the files in that folder here on this left column. So SRC stands for source. This is where all the work is going to be done. Public is where you put files that you don't want to be processed by this little server here, just flat files like a favicon or your base index file. And node modules, don't worry about that. That's just a place where certain dependencies that React needs have been installed. But yeah, let's take a look inside our source. We'll start with app.js. Actually, sorry, let's start with index.js. No, I'm sorry, even before that, let's talk with index.html. Okay, so here's where it really starts. Index.html. This is an HTML file. It's not like a special HTML file like the Angular thing with a bunch of ng stuff over all around it. It really is just an HTML file. What's going to happen here is that the main index.js file is going to be injected here and run, and stuff is going to start showing up inside this little root div. But this is all it is, just an HTML file with a little head and body. You can change the title if you want, or not. It's up to you. So from there, we can go take a look at index.js. So here's index.js. Now, this is JavaScript, but there are a few parts of it that might seem unfamiliar to you. For example, there's this import statement here. When we're dealing with JavaScript on the internet, there's no concept. JavaScript on the web, through your web browser, there's no concept.
When I changed and saved.
Okay, well, you're getting ahead of me.
Oh, sorry.
There's the concept of, there's no concept of importing. Well, the idea is that when it all comes down to it, when all is said and done, a single JavaScript file is going to be loaded into our web browser. But in development, we can create a whole bunch of small JavaScript files that require each other, which creates this big dependency tree where everything that's required gets bundled into a single JavaScript file. So these import statements just talk about what needs to be pulled in order for this to work. So the first thing that happens is that we import React itself. We also import something called React DOM, which allows React to render HTML elements to the DOM. Like I said, React can also render stuff that it can also be used to, for example, make make native UI for iOS or for Android. So you wouldn't use React DOM in that case, since DOM specifically refers to the document object model in the browser. But we're importing these two things. We're also importing app, which we'll take a look at in a second. And interestingly enough, we're also even importing a CSS file. That's interesting. A JavaScript file importing a CSS file. The idea is that the way React app is set up is that you can import CSS, JPEG, text, PNG, a whole bunch of different SVG, a whole bunch of different files, and just import them like any other JavaScript file, and they'll just be included and used in a cool way. And we'll see that happening in just a second. But simply by importing index.css, it is now loaded onto the page and just decorates the page with some body styling. Right. So there we go. Okay, so back to index.js. We're telling React DOM to render something onto the page. What we're rendering is something that looks very much like HTML inside our JavaScript file. That's interesting. We don't usually like to see like angle brackets inside our JavaScript file unless we're doing less than or greater than comparisons. But what's happening here is this is sort of a superset of JavaScript called JSX. Facebook kind of created it. Facebook, by the way, is the company behind React. React is an open source project, but it is made mostly by Facebook staff. Well, and a whole bunch of open source contributors. Anyway, with JSX, you have what we've got is something that looks like this, where it looks like we're rendering out HTML inside our JavaScript, but it ends up really under the hood turning into a statement to tell React to render out certain things. So what we're doing here is saying, hey, React, render out this app that we've imported, and React DOM inject it into the root. This little document.getElementById thing is a built-in DOM thing. It's not React-based. It's not jQuery based. It's just find this element by ID and put this inside it. Simple enough. Okay, so what's app? Why are we putting brackets around it? What's going on? Let's take a look at app. Okay, so here we're importing React. We're also importing something from React called component. We're also importing an SVG logo. Here's that image that I talked about earlier, the fact that you can import images. We're also importing another CSS file, which styles some of these things a little differently. Just app logo, app header, app intro, and a little animation right here. So here's another interesting part of ECMAScript 6, or that is to say more modern JavaScript that you won't see in a browser. And it's something called a class declaration. So you might or might not be familiar with classes in the world of object-oriented programming. The idea that you've got this sort of object, this sort of thing, this little sort of blueprint that can spit out an object that has some properties, has some methods, has a little bit of information about how it should start, how it should be built, and what its capabilities are. And the cool thing about creating a class that does this sort of thing, that has this sort of behavior, is that it can extend the behavior of existing classes, such as component. So from React, we're saying, let's get a component, and let's add some behavior onto this component. So I talked earlier about components, about how the world of React is components within components within components. And again, the end job of each one of these components is to simply render out some stuff. Which in this case will turn into HTML. So this component inside it has a little render function, which at the end of the day returns what looks like a lot more HTML here. Again, this is JSX. It's a little different than HTML in that elements like image that don't actually have closing tags need to have a little slash at the end here, a little trailing slash, just like XHTML if you're familiar with that. It needs to look like that or else it won't work. Also, different from HTML is that we can't use the attribute class. Rather, we need to use class name. See how we're using div p, class name instead of class? The reason for that is because, like I said, even though this looks like HTML, under the hood it's going to translate into JavaScript. And the word class is a reserved keyword, which we're actually using right here. And so we can't use class to refer to CSS classes. We need to use class name instead. So those two things are the big differences between straight up HTML and this sort of JSX code that you'll see inside JavaScript
Can you
files.
alternately use a explicit closing tag, or do you have to use that syntax?
You could do this, but that's very strange because you'll never see a closing image tag. There's no such thing.
Right.
So you might as well just do this. Also, there are cases in which even things like this, in case this H2 is blank, you could do this very much like in XML. But you can do it either way. Either way.
You might want to do that. I would think if you have a blank one, you need to fill in later with code.
Sure. Yeah. That's perfectly fine. Cool. So at the end of the day, it's even though you might not understand every single line of what's going on in this file, it seems pretty apparent that you got your root here, you've got your app here, which is going to go into root, and then you've got your app stuff here inside this return statement, which is probably going to replace what app is, right? So pretty obvious. At the end of the day, we've got this. If we inspect it, you'll see that we have div class app, div class app header, div class app intro. And here we are, app header, app intro. And of course, if I change this and go back here, magically it has changed. I didn't even have to reload the page. Create React app has set up something called a hot module reloader, which goes ahead and looks for changes to any specific modules and just changes them out when necessary. It's pretty sweet.
If the window is a different part of your screen, will it update, or do you have to get focus for that to happen?
No, I think it'll just update. So like, for example, if I wanted to, what's going on here? If I wanted to put this up here, I wanted to put this over here, just have them side by side, and press save.
Okay, cool.
It just reloads itself. Yep. Cool. So there's that. Okay. Any other questions about how this all works so far? It's pretty apparent, pretty reasonable, right? You just have a render function which goes ahead and returns something, and what it's going to return is not a string, not a number, but a big block of oops, I just messed it up. A big block of JSX, which results in this. If you are interested in looking under the hood, you can go ahead and take a look at the JavaScript files that show up in your sources panel here. Man, there's a lot of stuff. Let's see if I can make this a little easier to read. So here's sources. We can go ahead and open up actually, a better way of doing this is just inside. As long as you're focused within your DevTools, you can do a Command O and type in app.js, and it'll just open up what we've got here. And this, what we've got, looks a lot uglier, but it is the compiled browser JavaScript equivalent of what we have on the right here. Up here, we're importing React. We're importing logo.svg, importing app.css. Down here, we're creating an app that is a function of a component and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of weird stuff going on here. And at the end of the day, we've got this render function, which renders out create element, create element, create element, create element, create element. Every time that I'm saying create element is essentially one of these things, one of these brackets being turned into a create element column. So again, the stuff on the right is a lot nicer than the stuff on the left. That's actually what's happening under the covers. Fortunately, you know, 99.9% never have to deal with any of this stuff. You just have to deal with the nice-looking, modern ECMAScript 6 JSX code. So there's that. But you know, in case you ever want to see how it's working, how the veggie patty gets made, I already made that joke. Then you do this. Okay, neat, good stuff. Yeah. Uh-huh.
We're writing comments inside the code. So try to use the slash and showing up on the page.
Good question. So anything that shows up inside here, like such as this text or here, is really just going to be treated like text. If you want to interpolate some, well, so there's two things you can do. Oh, actually, here's a question. Can you do this? Probably not. It's probably gonna break. Yeah, it's gonna say failed to compile syntax error. So no, you can't do HTML comments inside JSX, and you can't do JavaScript comments because it's gonna end up looking like this. So how do you actually write comments inside your return statement? Well, you have to use interpolation delimiters. What are those? What are interpolation delimiters? Well, they're right here. What's going on here is we've got these single brackets, which are nice and orange inside our JSX. And whenever we see that, what we're doing here is we are able to run JavaScript within the scope of this function and just print stuff out, much like we were talking about those double brackets in Angular earlier, where you're able to evaluate little statements. Remember that everything that's going on here is going to end up being JavaScript. And whenever you have these single brackets, we're essentially breaking out of the weird JSX world and going back into straight up JavaScript. So right here, logo is going to print out the value of whatever the logo is for the source. So if we actually take a look at the page, I'm sorry, not this page. We take a look at the DOM, that is, and open this up. Actually, just go ahead and inspect here. We'll see that it's got a source of static media logo dot blah 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 dot svg, and that's what logo is. We don't even really have to worry about that. It's given it a weird name just to do something called cache busting, making sure that if you change the image, that it updates automatically. But simply importing it and throwing it in here works. So to answer your question, if you do want to put any comments inside your JSX, you're going to have to write comments inside a little delimiter that allows you to run any JavaScript you want, including putting comments in here. Looks weird, but it works. And it certainly won't show up this way. Okay. I think you can also use single line comments. So if you wanted to use like, no? Oh, you're right. Can't do it.
Yeah.
Also, no, I think it's more adjacent elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. That might be, I don't know what it is.
Put the curly, close the curly breaks in the next line.
Yeah, you can do that.
The last curly brace
I mean, if you
becomes
use,
part of the comment.
The last
It's
curly.
it's no longer delimited, so maybe you can escape it.
Sorry?
So
So-
like when you have two slashes, the
Yeah.
last curly brace look like the.
Oh yeah, that's probably it. Yep, that's why. Yeah.
So maybe if you. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Either way, just use block comments. I don't really find myself writing a lot of comments. See, inside my JSX, usually because the JSX, at the end of the day, is really here to just like, I talked about the whole Angular concept of model and view. This render function is just supposed to be straight up view. All the logic, all the data is supposed to come from somewhere else. And this app right now is very slim on actual data. So I think that's a good segue to talk about, what an app that actually has some data inside it ends up looking like. So, yeah, well, actually, before we do that, I would like to be true to the name of this app, Noise Twitter, and pretty much copy and paste what we've had before into this application. So this is what I want you to do. If you've downloaded my stuff before, I'm actually going to skip out of class 12 because that has a bunch of weird Angular stuff around it. I'm going to go into class 7 instead. Series 10, class 7. I'm going to open up index.html here because this is just a jQuery version of the same thing. And the HTML is pretty much untouched, and all the JavaScript happens in the JavaScript file. So I'm going to open up this index.html inside Series 10, class 7. Series 10, class 7. I'm going to take everything inside the body, this form and this section, copy it, copy this whole thing, and I'm going to paste it into app.js, wherever that was. Here it is. So this div's going away. It's going to be replaced with this. And if you save, you're going to have a bunch of problems. So save and see what the problems are. First problem, expected corresponding JSX closing tag for input. That's interesting. Well, it looks like line 12, we've got this input here.
Oh, you just need a space and a slash.
Indeed, I need a little slash at the end because input is a void element. It's a self-closing tag.
On class name.
That is true too. So let's save that, see what the next problem is. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So the problem is we got form and we've got section, but adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. What that means specifically is that this return function must render a single element with its children. And what we're doing right now is rendering out two elements, a form and a section. And that is something that React simply cannot do. So this is one caveat. Your DOM is going to be a little messier because you're going to end up having some root elements, some divs, essentially, that are not necessary, don't really do anything at all, but they're simply there because you need to be able to render out one thing. So something like this app that's responsible for rendering out two portions of the page, it's going to be a little more complicated than it otherwise would be. So let's just surround this form and section inside a div and be done with that. Okay. So again, div here at the top and end div here at the bottom, right before that little ending parentheses there. Okay, we're going to save this and get another problem.
Would there be another way of making section a child of that form?
Well, you could put it inside the form, but I don't think that this section, which is a list of tweets, is part of the form. So I would not do that.
Awesome.
Yeah. In fact, once we start thinking about breaking this out into multiple components, because we've only really just got the app component right now, but once we start breaking it out, we'll see that that's not a good idea. You know, we really do want to have our list of tweets separate from our form that creates new
So they're going to be
tweets.
separate components.
They will be eventually, yeah. Cool. So next problem, expected corresponding JSX closing tag. Good thing it points to line 20. That's correct. Well, it's actually line 19. Well, you're right. Line 19, let's do this. We're going to have to do that 2 more times because we've got an image here. I've also got an image here on line 33 or whatever line you're working on, and then also on line 45 for me. Save that. The next problem, well, it renders stuff out, kind of.
So yeah, we are still using the word.
Just to
So
say
it's
how-
okay with the class word, even though it's sort of.
It's actually not okay. If you take a look at the DOM here, you're going to see that the section does not have a class name of tweets.
Yeah.
Does not have a class. This form does not have a class name of tweet box. So
Essentially, your HTML rendered without CSS.
yeah. So here's what I'd recommend you do. Something that will really help you with whatever text editor you're familiar with is learning how to do a find all and replace all. So in Sublime Text, I can go to find, replace, and I'm going to type in class equals and replace with class name equals with an uppercase N. Why do I want to do this equals here? Because I don't want to replace the class on line 5. So I just make sure that I replace anything starting with class equal with class name equals. I'm sure you'll find this in other text editors too. Usually the shortcut, at least on Mac OS, is Option Command F to do a find and replace. But otherwise, just look for either edit, find, or find, replace, and I'm sure you'll get it. And just can go ahead and do a replace all. Bam. Will that change anything? Nope, it won't change anything because we didn't actually load up the CSS file.
You need to import it.
Yeah, well, we could import it actually. Yeah, you're right. Should we do that?
I don't know.
We could. I think so. Well, we have two options. The first option is we've got this index.css, which is actually being loaded via. Yeah, so I think we could do that. One thing that we could do is simply just add a link tag up here that points to the CSS file. But let's do it the cool React decomponent way and say that our index is going to load up our main CSS file. I don't want to deal with changing all the names of my CSS file. I'm not here to talk about CSS. So I'm really just going to go ahead and open up style.css from class 7, copy and paste this entire thing, and then go back into, where's that? Hello? Right. Go back into index.css and just replace the whole thing. So I've just pasted the entire contents of style.css from class 7 into index.css, and look, it's automatically been uploaded. It's automatically been updated with all the cool stuff. My avatar isn't loading. That's because I need to put this avatar.jpg, I think, into my public folder, and that should just work. So, if you want to do that too, we might as well. I'm going to go ahead and copy avatar.jpg into Noise Twitter public. So why public? Well, public, as I said earlier, is a place that is untouchable by our whole JavaScript bundling system. This is going to be outside the realm of outside of the realm of my whole module importing sort of thing. I don't actually want to load an image file into my JavaScript, although I could, because we're doing that with like logo.svg. But in this case, I'm just going to be referring to it by name. I don't really want to get too far into that whole sort of silly stuff. So avatar.jpg living inside public will just end up at localhost/avatar, and I think it will just load up. Here we are. Ta-da! It worked. Something that I seem to have glossed over, but might be apparent to you, is that we are running a local server. I'm sure if you've been to my classes on Foundation CLI, or that's about it, right? Or just like talking about HTTP and loading up a simple server, like whatever that thing was called, push state server, a few other things that we installed. You'll know that if you see localhost : something new URL, that means that we're loading up a local server. So that is the way that your browser is able to communicate with the app that's still running inside your terminal here, and just be able to get the instruction to reload itself, load new stuff, and load as if it's a little bit more actually on the internet, because we're not using the straight up file protocol to just load up specific files from your computer. We are making kind of a little round-trip loop inside your computer, making an HTTP request to another application working on your computer. So a little difference of running a local server. So there's that. Cool, but here we are. We pretty much have exactly what we were dealing with Noise Twitter before. Stuff doesn't work. Pressing this tweet thing actually reloads the page, which will give us flashbacks, nightmares to class 6, where we had a form that didn't do anything other than that. But we'll fix that shortly. Yeah?
Again, there it says adjacent JSX elements must be roughly an enclosing tag at the section in the article.
That's correct. Section and article. I'm not sure about that, but did you wrap this entire thing inside a div? Okay. And you said section and article, huh? Did you close the div down here? Did you close the section? I'll really quickly just take a quick look just to make sure everyone follows along here. I would say get rid of those script files. You don't need those script tags there. Let's see if that changes anything. Okay. Scroll up to the top. You got a div, you got a form. Let's see here. So a little bit. Article. That all seems to be fine. And then you've got an ending section and then you did. You save this and maybe reload the page. Reload the page. What's going on there? JSX element supposed to be wrapped into the tag. That's very strange to me. Go back to the scroll to the top and scroll. Oh, yeah, maybe get rid of that comment. That is the problem. That is the problem right there. You can't have a comment outside of that because it's being treated as a node. Nope, still a problem. Oh, that's something else. Yeah, okay, see if you can solve that issue. Make sure that you put little trailing slashes at every one of your images as well. Just a little slash right there. Yep. This stuff can get complicated. We're dealing with a big nest of HTML that I've provided you. Okay. So again, we're still rendering out something that has no behavior, has no behavior and has no data of its own, has no model, if you will. Well, the model in the world of React is also referred to as the state. Every component has a state. So we were talking earlier about classes and about how components are classes. And when you render one of these elements, you're instantiating a class. That is to say, you're creating a new class of app, and this app thing is alive, and it has the ability to store some information in it as long as it's alive, as long as it's being accessed and used. And when you instantiate it, you have the ability to tell it to store some internal information. So not only can this class app have a function like render, but it can also have some information stored inside it. Very much like Angular controllers can store scope. We can also store some information and make use of it in different ways. So this is what we do here. Every class has a special method called constructor. And constructor, in this case, takes a series of properties. And we want to run this, which I'm kind of going to gloss over. But essentially, it's just making sure that when you instantiate this app, the constructor function is going to be called. That's just the way things work. But we also want to make sure that the component instantiation constructor thing also gets run. So that's what super means. Don't worry too much about it. Just write it out. But also inside this constructor, I want to go ahead and set up some basic data to go along with this thing. And it's going to look like this. This.state equals an object. So you're probably seen this before. It's a context variable that refers to something. In the case of this constructor, this refers to the specific instance of the app that you've created. When I say the specific instance, in React, you can render out as many components as you want. But each one of those will be an individual instance of app, and it'll have its own information, its own state. So this .state is going to be the state of this specific specific app component. So this object, you can store anything you want in it. In fact, it doesn't even have to be an object. It could be an array. It could be just a string, a number. It could really be anything. But I want to keep it as an object so I can store a whole bunch of other information inside it. One thing that I want to store inside it is tweets. and tweets is going to be an array. See where we're going here? If you were here for the recap, we saw this in Angular. We went ahead and just added an array called tweets to our scope, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. In fact, if you want to get a little bit of a head start, you can go ahead and simply just copy and paste from class 12. So I'm going to go ahead back to FWD, series 10, class 12, open up app.js, and just go ahead and take this array. Lines 8 through 27, just copy the square brackets and everything inside that. Again, this is series 10, class 12, app.js. Let's go ahead and copy it, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it right here. Just a little indentation with the tab key. Nothing's changed yet. These aren't automatically loading from the state. There's no magic going on. But now that we have these, we're able to get to the next step where, well, what we did in the Angular class was use ng-repeat to print out one article multiple times. We're going to do that here as well. Not use ng-repeat, though. We're not using Angular, of course. So does everyone have this? The array tweets is now inside this state object that's being created along with its constructor. The really great thing about Create React App is that if there are any syntax errors, if there are any reference errors, type errors, or whatever, it'll show up like in a big black, background on this screen. So I hope that you have run into that because it's simply just trying to help you along. But if anyone is not seeing something that they should be seeing or having any other problems, please do raise your hand and tell me because I want people to follow along. I also realized just now that I should have had my comments thing open for YouTube. So there might be people who are flailing their arms on the internet and I haven't been acknowledging them, so I apologize for that. Let me see if anyone said anything. Still downloading. You're welcome. Okay, good. Problem solved. Okay, so let's do something here. So remember how I said that you can use those single curly brackets to run some JavaScript in here? Well, this render function has access to this. This context variable is the same thing here. So we can access this.state. And this.state is an array. And arrays have a method on them called map. So what does map do? Map is a function. It's very, very popular in a functional programming environment that allows you to simply take an array and run a function for every item in that array that results in a new array of something. So you take an array, you take its contents, and you return a new array after you've processed every single one of those things. So the old array is going to be these objects. The new array is going to be an array of JSX elements. So that'll be kind of interesting. So the first thing we do right here is a new little curly brackets there. And we're going to refer to this.state.tweets.map. Okay? This.state, and then the tweets array inside the state object, and then the map method living on this array. That's just built into every array.
Question on the, you saw that this scoping, you want to refer to the parent components this. Is there a way to get to it? For example, so you have a subcomponent, and then you want to look at the object that's on the parent.
I don't know. That's good. That's a good question. Not sure. I've never had to do it. So.
Then you have to actively call something through.
I think you would have to,
Yeah.
I mean, overhead to do that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just inherits all the properties from the parent, so you could just refer to those properties without having to do this.parent or something. But I do not know. Yeah, so this.states.tweet.map. So what goes inside map? A function. A function which will be passed every item that's inside tweets, and it's going to return the new thing that we want to print out. So I'm going to start out by writing a function like this. Let me go out of split screen mode here for a little bit. Okay, so this .state.tweets.map function tweet, and then we're going to return something. So what are we going to return? Sorry? We are going to return some JSX. And what we're going to return specifically is this JSX. So just take that and paste the article into this return statement. So as you can see here, I'm surrounding this JSX with parentheses. I don't think that's 100% of the time necessary, but it's kind of just a good practice to make sure that you know like where your JSX begins and ends. And so we're going to return this.
You just want to return one?
You do want to return one per tweet. So if you want to get rid of these other two articles, you can at this point. So just go ahead and delete those two articles, and all we have left is just this single one. So what you should get at the end of the day is 3 tweets with "you love a bad name." We haven't yet taken the value of every individual tweet, and inserted them into each one of these things here. So, where were we? Here we are. Let me just do a little bit of consolidation here. Okay, so you should see this. You should see "you love a bad name" 3 times. If so, good news. You're caught up. What's going on here is that, interestingly enough, here in app, oh, I'm sorry, this is Angular, this is jQuery, this is CSS. Interestingly enough, right here, what this is resulting in, what this map function is returning is a new array. So that's kind of actually interesting. At the end of the day, this is going to be an array. So inside JSX, inside curly brackets, we can just put an array, and it's going to print out every single one of those items inside the array, which in this case, each item is a big JSX nest. So there's that. Yeah.
I still have the 3 different names.
Did you get rid of all the article stuff underneath this bracket here?
Yeah.
You did, huh?
Yeah. Looks like yours. Did you alter anything within that?
I did not. If you altered this to be tweet.content, then you are ahead of me. But
it is tweet.content, but I don't remember altering. I don't know.
Are there ghosts?
No, it's you love, I think. Excuse me.
The class name is tweet content.
So can I see your page? Oh yeah, you're not looking at the React app right here. You're looking at file users class 12. This is the wrong file. Oops. There you go. Fix that mistake and then we'll be on track. Thanks. No problem. Okay, cool. So we got our article. It's being printed out 3 times because that's what this map function is doing. Before I go any further, I want to talk about a little bit of ECMAScript 6 syntax goodness here. You're going to find in the world of React that you have a lot of functions that return things. They take something and they return something. That's all they do. These are known as pure functions, where all they're responsible for doing is just taking input and printing something out. They have, or returning something. They have no side effects. They're not accessing anything else within your scope. They're only doing a single line of stuff, which is actually what this thing is doing. Even though this looks like multiple lines, it's really still just one single statement, which is return. So in that case, we kind of don't want to have the word function all over the place throughout our entire thing. So ES6 gives us a simpler looking function. It's called an arrow function, and it looks like this. So very specifically what I did was I just got the word tweet here. I've got an equal sign and a greater than bracket. Then I've got that thing that I was rendering out, the parentheses and all this stuff inside there. And then I've got the ending parentheses for the map call there. So what ES6 allows me to do is say, take a tweet and return this. Simple enough. So no need for the word function, no need to do return to call the return thing. This is implicitly returning something having been passed in a tweet every time. Now we're not actually making use of this tweet yet, but I just wanted to simplify the syntax a little bit and make it even easier, possibly easier to read. But yeah, every time you see this little arrow syntax here, you are calling a function. If you're familiar with CoffeeScript, same sort of thing is happening. You know, but this is more built-in stuff.
Arguments, more than one argument.
You can have multiple arguments with one of these things. You do have to surround this inside parentheses, though. So it would look like that. But with one argument, it just looks like that. Cool. So tweet this. So now that we have access to tweet, let's use it. That's not class name. That's different. Let's go ahead and replace the content with tweet.content. Pretty straightforward. Tweet.content. Remember, tweet is an object, so we're just referring to the content string, content property within tweet. And I'm sure it's pretty apparent what you can do otherwise here. You can just say twitter.com. Well, actually, we can't modify strings the same way. That's not going to work. But I'll get to that in a second. We can, though, change this alt to just even get rid of the quotation marks. Just say tweet.author. Is that it? Yeah, tweet.author. Make sure you don't surround these things in quotes, because that's not going to work the way you expect it to. Unlike in Angular, where you could put these double brackets inside strings, you can't do that inside JSX. So you're going to have to do interpolation a different way, or concatenation specifically. Let's see. So tweet time, that can be changed to tweet.time. Change the author to, again, tweet.author. Let's see. What else do we have? Image source here, I think that's going to be, yeah, tweet.avatar. So we're almost done, but what about this stuff here? What about the fact that we've got my username at the end of twitter.com so-and-so? Should really be HTTPS. So how do I do this? Can I do this? The syntax highlighting in my text editor seems to suggest I can't really do that. That's going to end up literally being https://twitter.com/bracket tweet.author bracket. That's not going to be a real URL. So how do we specify this string plus something else? Well, concatenation. We just surround this inside here, and then we can do plus tweet.author, which is fine. That's how you do concatenation in JavaScript usually. You take a string, and then you do plus, and then add something onto it, and that'll work. But you can do it a different way. I'm going to leave this as it is for a second. But down here, I'm going to do this in a different way. It's going to look like this. Instead of using double quotation marks, I'm going to use a backtick. That is to say, next to the one key, I'm going to use a backtick. And this is a new kind of string. This backtick is what's referred to template literal syntax. It allows me to interpolate variables inside this string, and it looks like this. So note the purple. Here's a little purple backtick, and here's some string content. And then I've got this interesting delimiter here that's a $, curly bracket, and then an ending curly bracket. So don't get it twisted. These outer curly brackets here are part of JSX. The ability to evaluate JavaScript statements within this HTML-looking stuff is part of JSX. But this weird purpley thing here with the curly brackets and a little $sign at the beginning with these backticks is just part of the ES6 template literal syntax. It's the new cool way of printing out strings. And you can pretty much just go ahead and write all your strings this way. there's really no downside to using these backticks. It's just better in every way than using single or double quotes.
It doesn't provide interpolation. You can does it run any faster. I know like in Ruby, the single quote runs a little bit fast, tiny bit faster. It's got the interpolation ability.
It ends up being transpiled into straight up just, you know, regular ES5 concatenation anyway with single quotes, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah. I would say you might as well write it all like that.
Can you do, I'm assuming, I don't know much about the ES6 templating, but like, is it something like Twig or something like where you can go to, I mean, does it have a whole templating engine part of it?
I don't know. I'm not really sure. I mean, like, there's no such thing as like precompiled handlebars templates or things like that. I mean, like, there's nothing like that.
An
But
example would be like, well, in Twig you can do like, you can make up your own ones with the uppercase, for example.
well,
And then the whole thing would be.
what's going on inside these curly brackets is JavaScript. So you could say like tweet.author.to uppercase,
Something like
and that would work.
Yeah.
For some reason, the two forward slashes have comment repeating twitter.com.
Yes.
Those have commented out. Those are being interpreted as a comment for the rest of the code.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why. I can't tell. It doesn't look like I have any typos here.
Let me double check here. So
Yeah,
this.
is it the correct that reads?
Yeah, I think so. It's the one before the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be happening for me.
Yeah. It doesn't.
Not for me specifically. It could just be your text editor. It could just be that your text editor is doing improper syntax highlighting because it might be unaware of JSX. That's something that I actually should mention, which is that the reason that my stuff looks the way that it does is because I already installed a Babel extension for Sublime Text that detects that this is a specific kind of JavaScript file that uses the Babel transpiler to change ES6 to ES5. So if your syntax highlighting looks like a mess, there's a few things you can do. Ignore it, or you can install a specific plugin for your text editor that makes your stuff look the right way. So if you just search for like Sublime Text Babel or Atom Babel or brackets Babel or VS Code JSX, I think, whatever, you know, there's that. But at the end of the day, it's just colors. So you know. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and use that same sort of template literal syntax up here as well. Cool. And now I'm back to where I started. You love a bad name, old Metal Head Farm, but all of this information is actually being loaded from the state. Okay.
Any DevTools let you alter the state on the client side to look and check and see it?
Yes. Let's talk about DevTools real quick. If you're interested in inspecting, well, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what React is actually doing. When React renders, it's generating something called the virtual DOM. It's kind of a misnomer since, again, it's not necessarily the DOM since it can render out to React Native or whatever else. But the virtual DOM is essentially just a whole nest of these elements, but in memory. It's not actually referring to specifically what is in the page, but its own concept of, you know, how the things are all laid out and whatever else. The difference, the reason that it has this concept of a virtual DOM versus actually just putting stuff into the real DOM is because modifying and accessing the DOM, the document on the page, is actually kind of slow. JavaScript has to reach out to the browser and tell it, hey, get this thing by ID, or get this thing by that, get this thing, change this thing around. So the fewer modifications and the fewer accesses that it can actually make to the DOM in your browser, the better. So why am I saying all this? Sorry, you had a question. So you had a
DevTools?
Oh yeah, DevTools. So you actually, there are the React DevTools for Google Chrome, which you can install, that give you access to the virtual DOM. And it's really literally like a parallel structure to what you see in your HTML. And it also lets you see specifically what the state is of every component inside your virtual DOM. So if you want to install them, then it's just React DevTools. First thing, that's not an ad, right here, React Developer Tools for Chrome. I don't know if there are DevTools for Firefox or Safari. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. But go ahead and add to Chrome. And now, any page that, that these DevTools detect are running React, you're able to inspect, go to the React tab over here, connect to React, and then open up this tree here. So check it out, app, and then inside there, we've got our virtual DOM of elements here. And then, you know, compare, of course, to the real DOM, where things are a little different. You've got this div data React root thing there. Pretty much everything else is the same. So there you are. And as you can see here, this this app here has a state of tweets. And if I wanted to change one of these things, you know, I just updated the state, and all of a sudden, this app has re-rendered itself.
You just what?
The app has just re-rendered itself.
Oh, okay.
So that's something I haven't talked about yet. When you change the state, the entire app method calls the render. Sorry, the entire app class calls the render app instance. Sorry, calls the render method again. So if any of these things were to change, the time, how many tweets there are, the content, whatever else, this render function goes ahead and gets called again. And it goes ahead and renders out all this JSX again. Now, the good thing about this is that React has the virtual DOM. And if React renders out something that is identical to what was in the previous virtual DOM, it doesn't actually change the DOM on your page. It doesn't actually go into Chrome and say, hey, Chrome, go ahead and update your HTML elements. It's not going to do that. So this is a little bit of efficiency that React has baked in, which is that it only does updates when necessary, only if anything's going to change. And that's something that's just a guarantee when you're using React. Nothing will update unless the virtual DOM changes. So that's cool. But
Are you saying like when it makes a DOM request, the whole web page refreshes?
no, not necessarily. It still tries to be as efficient as possible and only trying to change the elements that need to be changed. But even doing that, even going in and changing one or two elements, takes significantly more time, still in the measure of milliseconds, but significantly more time still than just updating its virtual DOM. Now, even though this is measured in milliseconds, when you have some sort of application that has thousands and thousands of DOM nodes, and you make a change that potentially could change hundreds of those thousands of DOM nodes, now all of a sudden you're dealing with dropped frames and you know, a lot of processing going on and stuff that starts to seem a little bit sluggish. So React tries to be as efficient as possible in not telling the DOM to update when it doesn't have to. So that's what we're trying to deal with here. So there we are. But we could be even more efficient and not have this entire app re-render itself when part of the state changes. For example, why do we need to update the form when a tweet is changed, right? The form has nothing to do with the state of these tweets. The form kind of has its own state of like what you've typed into the text area, right? So shouldn't those things kind of be a little bit separate? I think so, yeah. So let me see, is there anything else we can do in this app thing before it comes time for us to actually start breaking stuff apart? I say we start breaking stuff apart. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to go create a new file. Going to call it form.js, uppercase F. I like to refer to all of my components and files thereof with capital case. And form.js is going to start out kind of looking like app.js. I'm going to go ahead and copy this first line from app.js and also copy this line from app.js. And I'm also going to create a render function. And the render function will return something. still hearing some typing, so I'm gonna give it a little second. Really quick. Just gonna check. No comments. Cool. The trash out. All right, so this is pretty obvious what I'm going to do here. I'm going to take this form here, just go ahead and copy this for now, and put it right here. But what do I put in place of that form in app.js?
You're gonna have to import it.
That's correct. I have to import this file and include it just like index.js included app.js, or sorry, included app. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to replace this whole form, lowercase f form, with uppercase form. Remember that it's got to be a self-closing tag, so in this case I just do a little slash there. Use uppercase F because I'm referring to a component that I've created rather than a DOM element like section or whatever.
You need import too on top.
That's correct. But before I can do anything, I need to go up to the very top here and import form from form.js. Actually, I can just do form. When I omit the .js, it just assumes that I'm referring to a JavaScript file. This // means we're in the same directory as form.
It's basically a path.
Yeah, it's the path.
Which block of code did you paste into form? Was it within the map? Whatever you were mapping?
It was the form.
Above, okay.
Just the form, yeah. So I took the actual form tag and pasted it into that.
You're gonna have to export default.
Correct. Sorry. So yes. Or what am I talking about? These components, these files specifically, they import a lot of stuff, but they also have to export something, or else they're not usable. In index.js, I'm importing app from app. But in app.js, down here at the bottom, I've got a little thing saying export default app. That's a little line saying that app, which is this thing here on line 6, class app, is going to be exported as the default thing from this file. So in other files, like index.js, I can import app from app, and that's just going to be the default export, which I'm importing. Don't worry too much about the details, but we do have to export default form here. Otherwise, importing form.js isn't going to do anything. I'm not going to have access to anything. I'm going to get undefined when I try to import form because there's nothing being exported.
It's the default. I mean, what else can you use then in place of default there?
Oh, well,
export multiple things if you have multiple components defined in the file. Or
that's correct. React exports the default being React, but it also exports things like component. You can see these weird curly brackets here means that the default export is React, but I could also say something like export const foo equals foo, and now I can import brackets foo from this file, and it'll be this string.
Right.
So
default is the one that's in brackets, and otherwise you get the other ones like.
Yeah, that's not in the brackets, but yeah. Yeah. Anyway, fortunately, we're not going to have to worry too much about default import, whatever. So, yeah, right here we do need this line now. But yeah, now that we've moved this form into here, this form is right here in its place, and we're importing form up here. And in fact, we don't even actually have to import logo or logo.svg anymore, or app.css. We're not even doing that. So you can get rid of that in app.js if you feel like it, because we're not using the React logo. And finally, here we are. We should be back. I have a console error. What's the error? Oh, okay. I'll deal with that in a second. But in the meantime, I've got this form here. Inside my React virtual DOM, you'll see that I've got app, and then I've got form. And then inside form, I have an actual HTML form. So there we go. Now, here's a question. I update my app state with a new content. And does form re-update?
No, no,
Yes, it does.
it didn't show it.
Well, it didn't show it updating. In fact, when I say update, I mean that the virtual DOM was re-rendered. That this function here inside form, render, was called. And it went ahead and just like, parsed out all this JSX again and created a new virtual DOM tree. But since it was identical to the last time, it didn't actually update the page. But it did still render, even though the state of this form did not change. Why is that? That's because app.js is rendering out form. This render method did get called because the state of this component did change. And because form is a child of this, then it also got re-rendered. So this is a topic for next week. We're going to get a little bit further into finessing what specifically can get rendered and what doesn't have to. But by default, the way that React works is that every component within a tree will automatically re-render itself if its parent tells it to.
How did you determine that it was re-rendered other than knowing that it's within the return statement?
The only way that I can really determine it is by going into, say, form.js and putting a breakpoint on the first line of render, and then see, I'm going to go back into here and say, oops. And all of a sudden, as you can see, I'm now broken on line 34 of form.js where I'm rendering out stuff. So it is actually calling that function even though it doesn't need to. So that sort of inefficiency can be taken care of. There is something in React that allows us to do it, but we're going to take a look at Redux next week, which makes that even easier to do. But we still got some more Reacty stuff so we probably got at least another half hour of construction. Hope that's okay for you guys. We're going to keep going. One thing is that we do have an error in here that says each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. Check the render method of app. Okay, at app.js line 38, we are calling this, well, in line 37, we're calling this.state.tweets.map tweet so-and-so. And it's printing out one of these articles over and over. Now, when we render these things out, React wants to keep track of every child element that's being rendered in an iteration. Why is that? Because let's say that one of these things changes, like some of the contents of one of these changes. React wants to be as efficient as possible, and it wants to be able to know that the state of one of these tweets change, and it doesn't have to go into having to deal with all the other ones. So if we assign a unique key to each one of these articles, then we don't have to worry about that whole sort of thing happening. So what I can go ahead and say is article class name so is something, but I'm going to say key is going to be, well, something. Unfortunately, I don't have an ID for each one of these tweets things, so I could just use the iteration value that's being passed into this map thing, because when you call map, it's actually getting called with multiple arguments. Tweet being the first one, but the second one being an iterator number that is telling me how many, what index I'm at inside this thing. So I could do that. The only problem is that when I add a new tweet to the top, then that becomes index 0, whereas the one from the top now becomes index 1, and that's a whole sort of off by 1 problem. Well, not off by 1, but whatever. So really, really quick, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to say ID equals 2, ID equals 1, and ID equals 0. Actually, sorry, these are going to be numbers, not strings. This is just so I know exactly which ones I'm referring to. Giving little bits of data and ID is common practice if you're not familiar with anything having to do with databases or whatever else. Every bit of data should have a primary key, so you can always refer to it by something. So we're giving each one of these an ID, and that's going to be the way we can affiliate with them, even if the content changes, the author changes, the time changes. If any of those things changes, the ID won't change. Okay, so.
And you're just assuming you add tweets, you're going to increment this.
Yes,
Okay.
Indeed. So the key is going to be tweet.id. Now we can be sure inside this little loop that we're always, that React can always keep track of which elements are in there, and not have to worry about re-rendering everything inside one article when all of a sudden it becomes the next article because there's something behind it. Okay, so that warning should go away. It's gone. Great. Okay. Whoa, how'd that get all the way up there? That's weird. Anyway, what's next? Okay, this form. We want to go ahead and submit the data from this form. Okay, so here's what we can do. This is actually kind of similar to how Angular assigns event listeners. Unlike jQuery, where we use that on function, like find element.on so-and-so function, similar to Angular, we do submit equals so-and-so, and it looks like this. On submit, notice the uppercase S. And then we're going to pass in the function that is going to be called when we submit. And so I'm going to create a function called add tweet. Now, where does add tweet live? Add tweet can actually just live right here. Actually, I'm sorry, it has to be this.addTweet. Because if I don't do this.addTweet, then it would be referring to something within this render scope, and there's nothing called addTweet within this scope. I didn't do var or const or let addTweet equals so-and-so. So I have to refer to this, which is this entire instance here, and it's going to refer to addTweet here. I should also mention that I'm using that arrow syntax rather than the traditional sort of function creation syntax. Because otherwise I have these weird binding problems where this doesn't actually refer to this within this function. It gets really messy. So I'm just going to kind of gloss over it, but I am doing equals a function with that is an arrow function, blah, blah, blah. So what happens inside addTweet? Well, this is, if you're familiar with jQuery, this is where some jQuery stuff happens. The first thing is that we're passing in an event object. And with the event, we have to prevent default. What's default? Same thing that it is regardless of what JavaScript framework we're using. When you submit a form, it tries to load up a new URL based on what the action of that form is. Or at least it's going to reload the page. And we don't want to reload the page because this is a single page application. So let's not leave the page. Event.prevent default. By the way, unlike Angular, we're not going to do this.addTweet parentheses. Because what this means is that as we render this thing, then we immediately call this.addTweet, which we do not want to do. So we're simply passing in this.addTweet for later when onSubmit is called, when submit is actually occurring. So at this point, we can just make sure that everything's working by going back to the page and clicking the tweet button and seeing if we get a page reload or not. We shouldn't. So again, what I added was onSubmit this.addTweet, and then I added this to our form class. And let's see what happens. This is what should happen. You shouldn't see any flashes. You shouldn't see any, if you're at localhost 3000, you shouldn't see $tweet content showing up in the URL when you click it. So we had just prevented default. Great. Sorry, press the back button accidentally. Everyone following so far? Pretty much makes sense? Cool. Okay. So the next thing we want to do, though, is add a new tweet. Now here's a problem. Within this form, we don't have that state of tweets. State is specific to a component. It's isolated to a component. It is not passed down into children. So how is this form going to be able to tell its parent to update something? Well, we can't share state between these two things. The form honestly should not know about the state of the rest of the application. It does not need to know how many tweets there are on the page. But it does need to be able to communicate with its parent somehow. So how do we do that? Well, note section. It's got a class name attribute. This has class name and key. This has class name, this has a source, alt, class name, href, you know, a whole bunch of different attributes that are being passed in. Well, what we could do with this form is pass in some attributes. React components can take things called props, just short for properties. When you render them, you add a whole bunch of attributes which can pass in information from this state or this component into its child. So what I want to add is a method called addTweet. So this form is now going to have access to a prop called addTweet, but we need to create that function first. I realized probably before I even created this form, I probably should have done this first within this component. So bear with me. Pretend that this form is actually still part of this thing, because we're going to go ahead and create the addTweet method here. No, actually. So addTweet is going to be a function that takes text and does something. So let's call it from here. I just did a lot of stuff. All of a sudden, I'm going very quickly. But let me try to explain what's going on here. So this dot props, that's new. I have not yet referred to anything called this dot props. I thought I was referring just to this dot state. But then what's props? State is specific to a component, but props are data that are passed from a parent into a child. So because I am passing in this function called addTweet into this form, I now have access to this.props.addTweet within this form. That's just how it works. So you sort of have to make a leap of faith and just assume that you're being passed in the proper stuff from your parent. But you can actually specify what specifically you expect to get from your parent. There's a little thing you can add to any component called prop types. All right, I just went very fast again. What I've got here is a static property called prop types. Static means that it's added to this class rather than an instance thereof. If you don't know what that means, you don't have to worry about it. But what I'm basically saying is that every form has a list of props that it expects to receive from its parent. Notice that I'm importing a new thing from React called prop types. Prop types is essentially just a big dictionary of rules, different sorts of types of things that might or might not be required. What I'm saying here is that this form expects to be instantiated with its parent passing down a function called addTweet, which is a function, and it's required. If it's not there, then we're going to get a console error saying form expected addTweet to be passed down, but it didn't find it. So this is just an easy way for us to make sure that we're doing the right stuff, and that our components are warning us of bugs because we forgot to pass something down that was required. By the way, things don't have to be required. If we don't always need addTweet to be passed down, we can just say that prop types.func. But in this case, we are going to say it is required. So there's that. Let's go back to what this is doing. We know that addTweet is a function being passed down from app. But what's this then? Event.target.value. So event has a method called preventDefault, which prevents the form from submitting. But event also has a target, which refers to the DOM element that fired off the submit. So, hold on a second. Is it actually going to work? Because event.target is actually the form. So how do we get the text area? How did this even work
So
before?
you can have elements, so can you call elements on the target, children?
I could. Hold on a second. This totally worked when I did it, when I was experimenting.
Target is not the submit button, it's the actual form.
Yeah. So why would target's value be this? That shouldn't work
Is
at
there a
all.
value field on a form, which is the value of the field?
No, because there would be multiple fields to that form, so it
That's true, yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
necessarily just have one value. How did
Okay.
this ever work? You know, I'm gonna hold off and probably say that I've got a bug here, but I'm gonna continue onward and just say that right now I'm getting the value of the form, which doesn't really make much sense because there could be multiple text areas or something, and I'm gonna be passing that into this add tweet function. So let's create the add tweet function. We're referring to whatever is being passed into it as text, and we're gonna say this
Text here is a
dot-
variable name, or that it's a
text-
type?
text is going to be, well, no, text is the variable name. We're creating a function that expects something to be passed into it and referring to that thing being passed in as text. This is one of the harder things to understand for those relatively new to JavaScript, which is you can call these arguments whatever you want when you're passing them into the function. And that's what we're doing here.
Do you mind explaining the error that you just noticed? Like, why isn't our current form only has one input field? Why can't we access it through the value property?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
We probably shouldn't be able to do that, but somehow we. Oh, no, yeah. I know why. I've totally. Okay. Yep. This will not work. Thank you for asking me this, because I just remembered what I forgot to do. We have to do one more thing before we can add tweet. Let's talk about uncontrolled versus controlled elements in React. Here's an example of an uncontrolled element. I can just type into this. That's great. But how do I actually get the value of this thing? Currently, I don't have any reference to this text area. I can't say text area find the text area by its class name or find the text area by its element name, because I don't want to have to access my DOM. Remember, I'm dealing with the virtual DOM here, so I don't want to be able to do that sort of thing. So this is an uncontrolled component because when I type into it, React is completely unaware of what's happening to it. So I want to turn this into a controlled component. A controlled component reflects the state of the part of the state of the component, and it only changes by triggering an onChange event, which causes the state to update. So we've got a little bit of a flow here where you type something in, it calls a change listener, much like this onSubmit listener, which causes the state of this form to change, which then goes ahead and passes down the new value into the field. So that is the way that we're going to be able to access the value of this field. So let's do this. The first thing we need to do before we get any further is add a constructor function like we did with app.js. And we have to do super. But that's just what the constructor function has to do. And we also have to set the state of this form. That's the state of this form. It's just a string. Pretty straightforward. But now, this text area, in addition to its name, class name, placeholder, can also have a value of this .state.tweetbox value. Right? So React will do something pretty interesting here. Now that we've set this value here, look what happens when we try to change the field. Again, what I did was add this constructor, super props, this.state is an object with tweetbox value. I can get rid of these strings here. Is this. And then this.state.tweetbox value is being passed in a value. Let's see what happens. Nothing. It is preventing me from changing it. because it is a controlled component. It is bound specifically to what's in the state based on the value that I'm passing into it and will not change. So that's the difference between a controlled component and an uncontrolled component. But now that it's controlled, I need to be able to change it. So I have to add an onChange listener. This dot set tweetbox value. This text area element is now very long, so I'm going to be splitting all of its attributes onto new lines. You can do this in JSX. In fact, it's actually kind of recommended. In fact, this end text area thing doesn't even need to be there. I can just get rid of that slash text area thing and just replace it with a little trailing slash at the end there. Because now that it's a controlled component, I can't actually put anything inside those text area open and close tags because that would be the value. And I can't do that. I have to put the value right here instead. So let's add a method called setTweetBoxValue. Aha, right? That's where I'm getting event.target.value, because the target is actually the text area, right? Because that's the thing that's firing the onChange event. And so event.target is the text area, and the value is the value of the text area. Now, let's talk about this function, setState. Where's that coming from? We don't have a method called setState on this thing. Well, that's coming from the component. Remember that this extends component. And the setState method on the component is what causes the state to change, and then immediately after calls the render function again. So just going ahead and saying this dot state dot so and so equals something is not good enough. We have to call this dot setState because it updates the state and then it calls the render function. Because if it didn't call the render function, then the state would change, but the DOM would not, and that's bad. That is something you never want to happen. So you always want to make sure that whatever's rendered out mirrors what's in our state of our component. So we go ahead and set state tweetbox value of the actual text field that was typed in. And now let's see what happens.
Aren't you gonna have to pass in now set or about up like up a little bit in that add tweet? Aren't you gonna are you still gonna pass in event target value?
No, I'm not. So let's go ahead and change that now. It's actually going to be this dot state dot tweetbox value. Make sense? Yeah. Cool. So let's see what happens. Hello. Great. So it works again. Back to where we started, right? After all this, still no real actual behavioral difference. But that will change very shortly.
Open the React inspector, would you see that drop?
Yes, you would. You would see the actual state change every time I typed into this field. So let's go ahead and select this form here and look. Hello. See that? And I could even change it here if I wanted to. Cool. So that's how it found its state. All right. So value sets the text area. Typing into it sets the onChange thing, which sets the state of the text area, and et cetera, et
Is there
cetera.
like a shorter way to do that, or is that just how it has to be done?
That's how it has to be done. The shorter way of doing that is to keep it uncontrolled, but then you can't have access to the actual data.
So the reason we weren't able to alter the form before is because we had the value of the form preset to the text, to this dot state dot text box value, right?
The form didn't have a value of its own. That was just a mistake on my part. So this add tweet where I did this dot event dot target dot value,
Yeah.
that would have been null. That would have been undefined because forms don't have a value.
Yeah, but temporarily, well, earlier we gave it a value that we weren't able to change that value.
Yeah.
Temporarily. When you scroll up, you had it, as you start, assigned it a blank value there.
I didn't assign a blank value to form.
Then we used, okay.
Yeah, so remember that this is uppercase F form. This form instance has a state, where its text box value is so and so. But when I do an on submit, the add tweet method that gets called gets passed in the event, and I can access event.target, which is the form, but the form itself does not have a single value of its own. So that's why I had to make sure that I get the tweet box value and then access that tweet box value within this method.
So not the entire form, but the text area, you define the value of the text area to be equal to the empty string in our state.
That's correct.
To demonstrate that we can't change it.
That's right.
What is it now? Is it just the addition of the onChange attribute that's allowing us to change it?
That's right.
Okay.
OnChange calls set tweetbox value, which causes the tweetbox value in our state to change. And so now all of a sudden it's no longer an empty string. It's now whatever the value is of the text area as we started to change it. So what might be confusing is that you don't see that, like without that onChange thing, you don't see the value updating. But it is updating. The value is being set, but then React is immediately setting it back to whatever the value is.
Oh, okay.
But before React can do that, we're setting the state to the new thing, and so we're able to do that whole sort of new loop again. So that's where it's all coming in. Yeah, it does seem convoluted, but now we can have access to the tweetbox value throughout this entire thing, and even pass it into our parent component through props, through our prop method.
What is the target part? Event.target?
Event.target refers to the actual DOM element, the text area. Remember, the text area is calling set tweetbox value, so event.target is the text area, and value is its value.
So before, when it looked like you weren't updating it, it was just resetting it to string really fast.
Exactly.
To an empty string. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. Cool. All right, so now, here we are. So I'm pretty sure that add tweet is getting called, but add tweet is blank. So let's see what add tweet actually does. It's going to do this. This dot set state tweets is going to have a new tweet at the beginning. It's going to be content is going to be text. Author is probably going to be me. Avatar is going to be avatar.jpg. Time is going to be now. I could make it a date object, but I'm not going to deal with that right now. And then ID is going to be the current state. The current state, the highest ID plus 1, essentially. So it's going to be this dot state dot tweets index 0 dot ID plus 1. Remember? So this dot state dot tweets index 0 is going to be this one here. What's its ID? It's 2. So the new one is just going to be that plus 1. But
Did you like max there? Or that's
It looks like it's just replacing it though. It's not.
Max would probably be too fancy. Sorry? No, you're right. It's replacing it. It's going to replace the entire tweets array with just this. So how do we take all the previous tweets and add it onto this? Looks like this. This is very interesting. This is new to ES6. It's called the spread operator. What it allows us to do is take an array or an object, if we're dealing with objects, and take all of the values inside that array and break it apart into a list. Different than an array, simply just a commaed list of blah, 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 blah. So what I'm doing here is that tweets is going to be a new array with this object being the first. And then it's going to take every single one of these, 1, 2, 3, and just add them to the end of it. So it breaks apart the old array, takes all the contents, and stuffs them into the end of this new array. So that's what the spread operator does. Pretty cool. Again, that is new to ES6. That's something you can't do in plain ES5 JavaScript. Cool. So I think that should work. And that's probably the point at which we can stop for today. So let's see what's up. Yay! Hooray! So again, just because it's almost 9:45, I want to just drill down. Just calm down a little bit for the rest of the day. But let's talk. Let's talk about what we did. we are rendering out our app with a form element. We've got this function called addTweet, which will be passed in some text and change the state such that the tweets array now has a new tweet at the top, which has the text that's being passed in as the content, has this stuff that's just hard-coded, and then the ID is going to be the latest tweet plus the topmost tweet's ID plus 1. And then we're just going to add that onto the rest of the tweets that's there. Okay? So because we're passing addTweet into form, and we're requiring that it be passed in as a prop type that's required, we are now able to call this.props.addTweet from this addTweet method, which lives inside here. So that might be a little confusing. We actually have addTweet here. We also have addTweet here. I'm actually going to change this a little bit. I'm going to change this method from addTweet to handle submit. And down here, I'm going to change that as well. That's a more generic method just for handling the submission of this form here, because this form is not responsible for adding a tweet. It doesn't know really what tweets are. It doesn't have anything in its state referring to tweet. So why don't we just call this handle submits, because that's exactly what this thing is doing. And then call the prop addTweet, which is coming from the parent, and now we don't have two addTweet methods in two different places. A little bit easier to deal with. Actually, one more thing I just realized. Aha! One more thing I just want to do really quickly. You notice how when I type something in, it's still up here. So I could just do this over and over and get a zillion of these. Very easy way of not doing that. After I handle submit and add a new tweet, I can just do this.setState tweetbox value is empty string. Okay. So now after handling submit, after making sure the form doesn't reload the page, and after telling the parent component to add tweet, whatever that means, the form doesn't care, then it goes ahead and sets its own state back to a blank field. There's also the concept of a default state where you can just set it back to default, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. Yeah, anyway, there we are. And now it's empty, and I can add a new one, and there you go. I haven't gotten to the point where I can validate this thing, the tweet button, and make sure that it doesn't submit. I also haven't made these retweet and like buttons work, but at least I've gotten to the point where I can handle the whole loop where I type something into this text area, it changes the tweet box value right here, I go ahead and submit the thing, and it takes whatever the current tweet box value is, calls its parent, tells that to go ahead and add the stuff, and then sets its own thing back to blank. So there you go. Is this less verbose than what we do with Angular? Not really. It's actually a little bit more complicated. But I think that it is a very good exercise in proper, class component-based app management. This has a lot of similarities to other languages in the way that people do class-based, object-oriented programming, and I think that it results in a really easy to manage sort of hierarchy and layout. Next week, I can continue breaking things out into child components, and as I do that, I'm also going to start talking about the efficiency of rendering and the ability to think about whether you really need to have every component having its own little state, or whether having one giant state that sits on top of everything is a better architecture. So that's where we'll start talking about things like Redux. So that will be next week's class. Thanks for coming to this one. Again, class will be same time next week, Monday at 8 p.m. New material, 7:30 if you want to recap what we talked about today. I will have a small React exercise, pretty much involve creating React app and then making something that renders maybe a child. That's probably about it. And that'll be, you can work in it on your own time, or you can work in it at lab, which is going to be at 7 p.m. In the room right behind me, Turing classroom, not church. If you want to keep informed about future classes. Probably a lot of you heard about this via Meetup, and so you'll just keep hearing about that via that. But you can also join one of these mailing lists, Web Dev just for this class, or NoiseBridge Announce for everything that's happening in NoiseBridge. And also I have a Facebook group, which is pretty much the same stuff in Meetup. I create events and just post what's going to happen for the assignments and labs and stuff. And finally, make sure to donate. Not to me, but to NoiseBridge. Again, I'm just doing this as a volunteer, but NoiseBridge loves to make money to keep the space afloat. We are entirely 501c3 nonprofit and completely benefit from your donations. So make sure you click this button to do a recurring donation of $160 a month to NoiseBridge. So there's that. Yep. So thanks for coming. Thanks for staying a little late, and I'll see you guys later. Cool. Okay.